Both Russia and Ukraine are pouring reinforcements into the salient inner Ocheretyne. Is this a breakthrough for the Russian forces or a controlled withdrawal for the Ukrainians? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. We're going to talk about it. Let's get into it. Okay, so here's the overarching story, and you can see right here near Ocheretyne, you can see that Russian forces advancing over this large kind of open ground here outside of Berdichi. Russian forces seizing the town of Berdichi, crossing this Berdichi line. And I think given the fact that this is a pretty broad maneuver here, and it takes the Russians right to, you notice this river here, somewhat west of the original river that formed the Berdichi line. I think this is part of a controlled Ukrainian withdrawal, right? Normally, if this were a breakthrough, you would see a collapse that doesn't align with terrain. And instead, because it's lined up with terrain, I think this was an order given. I think the forces from Berdichi withdrew to these positions here. And I think this isn't the end, right? You can see that between here and a very robust defensive line at Soskil-Voskod, there's only two small villages and some farmland. So if you're Siersky, you're probably going to look at this and say, listen, we know that in a couple weeks, we're going to be in a way better position to fight the Russians. So let's not fight them here over these nothing towns, right? Instead, we're going to withdraw. We're going to hold positions where it's going to be really hard for the Russians to stage a breakthrough. And then in 3-4 weeks, when the U.S. aid arrives, then we're going to be in a position to either retake the territory or to just grind the Russians out. In the grand scheme of things, right, you can see that this is barely even on the radar when you zoom out for the larger front line. So I think that's the calculus that the Ukrainians are doing. But Russia, as we've talked about, per their own battle doctrine, depend on pouring reinforcements into a breach in the front lines. So here's an interesting article actually from David Axe that really summarizes the situations. That, of course, there was what he is now calling a breakthrough, and I think that's probably fair. Russian brigades, right, have been grinding out. They say slowly widening their salient, but by this war standards, this is actually a pretty rapid breakthrough. This is, of course, 5 miles deep. And the Ukrainians, right, they say it's a foregone conclusion. Ukrainians will lose a few villages around the Ocheretyne axis. Totally, I think, correct. And the command group, he argues, he says the real risk is that the command group responsible for forces west of Avdiivka will have no choice but to cut its losses, retreat a few miles to the west, and reconsolidate along a new defensive line threading north to southwest of Ocheretyne. This is what we've talked about. I don't think this is a huge danger. As we talked about, is it worth it for Ukraine to go toe-to-toe with the Russians now, lose some of their best combat troops when they don't have the material to support the fight? I would argue no. I think that's preposterous. I think the Ukrainians need to understand that they are, it's like a boxer, right? Imagine you're a boxer. There's 30 seconds left in the round. Blam, blam. You've been hit hard twice. You're a little woozy on your feet. You have two options. You can use this last 20 seconds and absolutely drop your hands and throw wild punches back, or you can cover up, grind out the end of the round, knowing that you're about to get a 1-minute break, and you have a feeling that at that 1-minute break, you're going to get some water, you're going to get some ice, you're going to be feeling a lot better, and when that bell rings, you're going to be way more ready to fight. What do you do, right? And logic tells you should cover up, wait out that round, and then go in fresh for the next round. Don't gas yourself out, or worse, create turn a dangerous end to the round into a KO by getting reckless, right? And brawling it out when you're at your weakest and your opponent is feeling that they're strongest. So that's the situation, that's the best analog I can think of. Right now, the round is almost over, right? When the aid arrives, it's going to be a new round of the fight, and Ukraine is going to be a lot better positioned to bring the fight to the Russians. So don't go swinging for the fences here. Button up, right? if you gotta eat a few more shots, make sure they're just body shots that you can weather, and then get to the end of the round and be ready to go back in when the bell rings. And that's the strategy that I think Ukraine is pursuing, or that they should pursue. And I know I try not to make shoulds on this channel, but I feel pretty strongly that this is the right call. Ukrainians, I think their command has a hard time distinguishing symbolic victories, right? The symbolic holding of Bakhmut, for example, from the battlefield reality, which is that Bakhmut was an empty shell of a city for 6 months or 3 months prior to the fall of Bakhmut. And so was that defensive effort worth it? A lot of people would argue, given that it ground down some of the most experienced Ukrainian troops, a lot of people would argue that it wasn't. Now, if you are feeling ground down, luckily you don't need to depend on a bunch of Ukrainian brigades to reinforce you, and you don't need $1 billion aid program. You just need your Strike Gum. Strike Gum, 0 sugar, 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece. That's as much as a Red Bull, as much as an Amp Energy. And I know we've had some issues on Amazon. We finally got those packs back up for sale. So if you want to, check us out on Amazon.com. But if you want the veteran discounts or the new customer discounts, you want to go to strikegum.com and order it directly from there. Thanks to the dozens of people who've left us reviews on Amazon and here on Strike Gum, right? We've got I think a 5.0 and a 4.9 star rating on the Amazon for the packs and trays respectively. So I really appreciate all you guys that have been such big supporters of the gum, but I see the reorders. It's not, you guys aren't doing it just to be nice. You really are seeing what I already know, which is that relative to an energy drink that's $4, tastes weird and gross, an entire pack of Strike Gum, this has the caffeine of 5 energy drinks, right? You can put it in your gym bag, put it in your glove box, right? Keep yourself dialed in and focused. Okay. So there's more information from this article that I thought was really interesting. And the fact is that at least 7 Ukrainian brigades and a separate battalion are pouring in to stabilize this situation. The 23rd, 25th, 47th, 100th, and 115th, as well as the 25th Air Assault Brigade, 3rd Assault Brigade, and 425th Assault Battalion, have all been thrown to stabilize this situation here. And the Russians, in turn, have poured their 15th and 74th Motor Rifle Brigades and the 90th Tank Division into this fighting. The Russians appear to have put about 10,000 troops in or near this salient, and only about 3,000 Ukrainians are currently opposing them, according to the Center for Defense Strategy's estimate. Now, that's not, that's actually, as David X points out, this is generally considered a normal defensive effort. Generally, an attacker wants to outnumber a defender by 3-1, all other things being equal. But when you actually dig into the math of this kind of rule of thumb, you realize that in a lot of battles, offense and defense sometimes don't really operate by those rules, right? Things like preparedness, things like equipment, things like training make a difference. And the fact that the Ukrainians are fighting on their back foot, so to speak, makes this defensive fight a little tougher. And it's another reason I think Syrskyi and the other commanders are probably want to see their forces fight a gradual withdrawal to prepared defensive positions on favorable terrain. And the other thing is that as the Ukrainians kind of, if they draw the Russian forces to push out from this salient, you can see that the Russian forces themselves, right? Do you really want to be one of these forces in Ocheretyne, where they've got Ukrainians to their north, to their east, to their southeast or southwest, and to their west, right? Surrounded on like 80% of sides by Ukrainians. It's a bad spot to be in if the Ukrainians can get their forces to bear. So salients, as we talk about, don't last that long in this war. They either expand or collapse, but they don't really often stay the same. And so I think that is the almost the objective, for lack of a better term, is to draw the Russians out into some of these areas where they're going to get too stretched out, and then it'll be even easier for the Ukrainians to break up supply lines or cut off units, right? I think there's a lot of advantages to this defense in-depth effort and a lot of disadvantages to this lock-in and surrender no territory mentality that, again, the Ukrainian high command can sometimes get really fixated on. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you for this update. We're going to keep you posted as much as we can on this developing situation. Thanks so much to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. You know that we actually saw some footage 2 days ago from the Battle of Ocheretyne itself. So if you wanted to check that out, you can become a member over at combatvetnews.com. See ya. Cheers.